Good afternoon. This is the second workshop from the series I'm offering during the COVID pandemic to invite people to invite all of you to discover your proprioception, your sense of internal movement. So as I was introducing the first lesson, proprioception is a sense that bodies have, which relates to the elongation of the muscles and the tendons and position of the joints and so forth. So it gives the body a feedback of its own position and movement, but inside, like say how I feel the relation of this torsion, relation to this torsion, and so forth. Internal muscular, not only muscular tendons, muscles, tendons, joints and so forth, but let's say it's like a fluctuating field of muscular tensions and other sensations, okay? But then, most importantly, is that this is what allows the body to move, right? So because we have this sense of proprioception, the body can activate its own movement, but furthermore, it is also the matrix where all other sensing modalities, vision, hearing, and so forth, also become integrated in our capacity to move. So we have a direct kind of embodied knowledge and memory of the world through that capacity to move, where proprioception integrates all other sensing modalities. This was already proposed by Charles Sherrington in 1906 when he published the landmark study on the integrative function of the nervous system. It's amazing that the revolutionary implications of this study have not been fully developed in terms of its ontological implications yet. So, in order to develop those radical potential ontological consequences of this idea of the nervous system being a rather times decentralized system of integration, where proprioception as a field has a crucial role, I would like to convey to you my concept of the proprioceptive swarm. A swarm, as you know, is, well, it's like a cloud of, well, insects or a flock of birds. This idea of the flock of this amorphous, kind of highly dynamic but amorphous entity. How can this image help us renew our, not just, well, I'm trying to have you discover that you have a proprioception in case you didn't know, but now I want even to transpose this idea or enlarge it to the infinity. Because what interests me about proprioception is its plasticity. What do I mean now with this plasticity and this swarm image? Imagine, first of all, as a provisional example, that you are like a flock of joints. You know how many joints a human body has? It's an amazing amount. It's 360 joints, but some of them are fixed in the crane and in the skull, but most of them are mobile and in fact very complex, with multiple connections between bones and huge mobility. So we can largely say that we have 360 degrees, we have a 360 joints body. It's like a flock. No? Imagine now the birds in the flock changing distance between one another, changing orientations continually between one another. Even when they go aligned, they are always shifting orientations, distance, and of course speeds, relations. All this composes an enormously complex field of relations of speed, orientation, and distance. That is the overall rhythm and dynamics of this field. Imagine now this applied to your own proprioceptive flock. Let me just make a parenthesis to say that rhythm, orientation, and contact, or distance, are concepts I take from Democritus and Leucippus, from ancient atomism, because I think their hugely dynamic ontology has been misinterpreted, largely due to Aristotle's misreading of it. So I want to claim they're highly dynamic concepts and bring them back and reinterpret them. So we will analyze our flock of joints. It's made of endlessly changing rhythms which come out from the speeds, orientations, and kind of densities or proximities. Now, of course, a flock of joints can't change like a flock of birds does, but still it has a great deal of possible changes. In fact, the combinatories of all these joints is larger than the number of atoms in the universe, just to give an idea of the enormity that's at stake, from which we normally experience just a tiny part. But let's zoom into the incredible complexity of that flock. Because, of course, what we normally feel when we move is not so much the actual joints, the 160 joints, which in their combinatory would already give a number larger than the number of atoms in the universe by far. But what we actually feel is a highly more distributed sensation of tension, elasticity, torsion, which is spread in between all the joints, the tissues that are in between the joints. Now, what are all these tissues made? They're made ultimately of cells that are contracting together because their cytoskeletons are made of proteins. The proteins are molecules that fold. The whole plasticity of organic life is because of the folding movement of proteins that Leibniz, in visionary manner, anticipated. So every time we flex a muscle, there are trillions of proteins flexing together like a swarm, right? Now, a protein is made of around about 1,000 atoms. Each atom has its own fluctuation. So our muscular flexing is connecting to subatomic vacuum fluctuations of matter in its variation. That is the degree of complexity, at least, and of course also outwards, like when I flock, when I propriocept the world, because I move in relation to something, so I feel the embodied knowledge I have of something is through my motion. When that happens, well, I am reaching out, I am flocking outwards with the world. Let's say that every also assemblage or say collective or environment of things is itself also a proprioceptive or say a flocking entity. Let's say that a city is like a flock, or a society, or a cloud, or and so forth. The biosphere, the galaxy. The galaxy is a star swarm, an incredibly complex star swarm. It has almost as many stars as a human body has cells. So we have all these degrees of magnitude and complexity intertwined in all these processes which evolves along the evolutions of the universe. So this complexity, the sustained or say the consistent openness of our bodies has come up over 4 billion years of evolution of bacterial swarms, self-organizing, bringing up the complexity of biodiversity through mutation. So we have embedded in our tissues this mutating movement of bacterial swarms, this self-organizing complexity. This is what I claim when I speak of BI, body intelligence, as this larger intelligence of the body which has endless capacities to move. These endless capacities we can unfold through subtle variation. The most subtle variation will be the best means to gradually unfold. It's of course an infinity that can never be reached. It's not a totality. You cannot think of it as a totality. You cannot ever like embrace the whole totality of infinity of possible movements of the combinatory of your joints, but you can develop a sense of internal freedom of movement, and this is important. Internal freedom of movement, which means I don't want now to separate internal and external, but it's a way of realizing that movement is not just walking in a space, displacement, which is the tragic misreading of what movement is that has come from Aristotle and Newton and so forth. Movement is just mechanical trajectory. No, movement is first of all this fluctuating field, so we can feel it. It's the fundamental experience of sensoriality that we have, and it embodies and connects all others. All other senses make sense because they come together in proprioception. So this infinite variation of our combinatory is another type of freedom that we have yet to claim. Right? The capacity to unfold the body's capacity to vary as a fluctuating field. So the fundamental state of the body, and we will explore this more in the next workshop session, focusing more on the practice. This was a bit more theoretical. Is the fundamental state of the body is fluctuation, always. We mentioned it last time as well. So if I stand still, I will never be still. Of course, I'm talking, but I'm also breathing, and the whole posture is fluctuating. Something releases in the neck. And I feel the caress of the clothes all over the body, because everything is fluctuating, no matter how still I pretend to be. And of course, this is already at quite perceptible levels. There can be more kind of barely perceptible levels, and then we will go into much smaller levels that are not perceptible, although the overall changes that happen can become perceptible in this very vague and amorphous way. This vagueness of proprioception is also our strength, it's also our consistency, it's our openness, it's the open consistency of the body as a field. So this is my concept of the proprioceptive flock or swarm, this endless capacity to vary the combinatories not just of our 360 joints, but of this molecular field that goes down to quantum fluctuation and up to everything around us, how I flock in relation to everything, and ultimately even with cosmic radiation and the biosphere. So of course this flock becomes impoverished when we align it excessively with certain types of environments that have been coming up in certain contexts, particularly of, well, imperial human cultures, and particularly Western rationalist cultures. Increasingly geometric environments that have imposed, especially since the Renaissance, almost complete erasure of that capacity to vary through a point of vision of Renaissance perspective. We have assumed increasingly over centuries, and still are in the apex of that type of culture, a culture of proprioceptive atrophy, of fixed points of vision, which means an absolute hierarchy and dominance of vision over all the other senses, and an almost erasure of movement. This is our culture of computer screens and smartphone screens, all the time framed, aligned with frames, and doing little movements of clicking, which is the utmost reduction that can happen in a body. On-off binary movements. That's the kind of radical reduction that is actually needed for planetary scale computation systems to operate. So we are becoming aggregates of this higher order body, which is actually grounded on our impoverishment and reduction. Well, I invite you all to counteract that tendency through bringing back this infinite complexity and capacity to vary in our proprioception. It's our wonderful heritage from our bacterial 4 billion years of self-organizing swarms. So in the next lessons we will do more specific focus on different kinds of exercises about, well, how to let that unfold gradually as an improvisation technology for unfolding our plasticity.